My son banned me from my grandson's wedding, but I made the whole family regret it. My phone buzzed just after dinner. I picked up expecting a casual chat with my son David. Instead, I got a sentence that sliced through my chest like ice. Mom, we all agreed don't come to Mason's wedding. No pause, no apology, just a cold verdict like I was some kind of burden. After everything I'd done raising David alone after his father died in that factory accident, helping Mason with his first car loan baking birthday cakes year after year, this was how they repaid me. They thought I'd quietly disappear, but they forgot one thing. I'm Margaret Hart, and I don't go down without a fight. So I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I listened, I hung up, and I started planning. This isn't just a story about a wedding invitation. It's about how one woman took back her place in a family that tried to erase her. It's about legacy, loyalty, and a quiet power that doesn't need to scream to be heard. And by the end, the very people who shut me out would be knocking on my door, ready for the twist. Let me take you there. Margaret Maggie Hart was the kind of woman whose presence didn't fill a room with noise. It filled it with warmth. Her small home, nestled just off a tree-lined street in a sleepy Pennsylvania suburb, always smelled faintly of cinnamon and lavender. She kept her porch light on, not out of habit, but out of hope that maybe one day family would stop by, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. At 72, Maggie had more stories than wrinkles. Her life hadn't been glamorous, but it had been grounded a life built on sacrifice, quiet strength, and unconditional love. She had been a widow for nearly 4 decades since the day a boiler explosion at the local factory took her husband Charles without warning. David, their only child, was barely 7. From that moment on, Maggie didn't have the luxury to grieve long. She had a son to raise a house to pay for, and a world that didn't slow down just because hers had stopped. David Hart was a bright boy, sensitive, curious, the kind of kid who cried when a bird hit the window. Maggie did everything she could to protect that softness, even as the world demanded she toughen up. She worked 2 jobs cleaning houses in the mornings and answering phones at a local insurance office in the evenings. She never complained. She never missed a school play. She saved every handmade card David ever gave her in a box beneath her bed. As David grew older, he drifted first emotionally, then physically. College career, and eventually a wife. Maggie didn't resent it. She expected it. What she hadn't expected was how his love would slowly become conditional, filtered through the sharp-tongued woman he married, Emily. Emily was the sort of woman who could charm a room and cut it down with the same smile. She was striking poised and unnervingly calculated. With a background in online psychological counseling, Emily had built a modest following, dispensing emotional clarity to strangers via video calls. She had a gift for reading people and a talent for rewriting narratives to suit her needs. From the beginning, Maggie had tried to give Emily a fair chance. She welcomed her into the family, handed over her mother's pearls for the wedding, and even stepped back when Emily started managing David's calendar holiday plans, and eventually family gatherings. But over time, Maggie noticed subtle shifts, fewer invitations, shorter calls, and the creeping feeling that her presence was no longer welcome, especially around her grandson Mason. Mason. Oh, sweet Mason. He was Maggie's heart. From the moment she held him as a baby swaddled in that blue blanket, with the little bears, she knew this child would bring light back into her life. She read to him, baked with him, even helped him write his first-grade poem about peanut butter sandwiches. As he grew, he would sneak into her house after school, just for cookies and real talk, as he called it. She never missed a birthday, a soccer game, or a single Christmas. She co-signed on his first car loan when he was 18. When his parents hesitated about sending him to that art program in New York, Maggie was the one who quietly wired the remaining tuition. Let the boy create, she'd said, and she meant it. But around the time Mason turned 21, the visits slowed. He stopped texting back. Photos she used to be tagged in on Facebook now featured family dinners she wasn't invited to. When she asked David what was going on, he brushed her off. "You know how busy things get, Mom." But Maggie wasn't naive. Emily's fingerprints were all over it. And just when she thought the distance couldn't hurt, more came the wedding announcement. Not a call, not a conversation. Just a card in the mail with gilded lettering. Mason and Caroline invite you to celebrate their love. There was no RSVP envelope, no phone number, just a website link that conveniently didn't recognize her name when she tried to log in. So she called David, and what he said, she would never forget Mom. We all agreed, don't come to the wedding. Not, I'm sorry, not this is hard. Just cold. Final. Like a door slammed and bolted shut. But before we get to what Maggie did next, you need to know one more name, Amanda. Amanda wasn't Maggie's daughter by blood, but in every way that mattered, she was family. The child of Maggie's best friend who had left when Amanda was 10, Maggie stepped in, feeding her, comforting her, helping her through every awkward teenage stage. Amanda had moved to Chicago after college, built a career in finance, and was now a well-respected wealth advisor at a firm that catered to high-net-worth clients. Unlike David, Amanda never forgot where she came from. She visited Maggie every Christmas, every Mother's Day, every time her flight connected through Pittsburgh. And over time, Amanda had become Maggie's confidant, the one person she could say the quiet parts out loud to. It was Amanda who first raised the idea of a trust. "Margaret," she'd said, "you've saved your whole life. That house, your pensions, the stock Charles left you, it's not just money. It's your voice. Use it." They worked on it quietly over months. Amanda set up the legal structure. Maggie decided on the rules. And together, they built something most of her family didn't even know existed, a $1.2 million trust fund. With a twist, it could be reassigned at any time, with Maggie holding full authority. That little document, signed and sealed in a tidy manila folder in Amanda's home office, was the insurance Maggie never knew she'd need. And she was about to use it. But not out of spite. Out of principle. Out of love that refused to be rewritten. Because no matter how hard they tried to silence her, Maggie Hart had one thing no one could take away: the truth. And the strength to make them hear it. After that phone call, just 10 cold words from her own son, Maggie sat alone in her kitchen for a long time. The tea on the stove had gone lukewarm, the cinnamon bread she'd baked that morning still untouched on the counter. Outside, the early November wind rattled the maple branches, casting flickering shadows across the linoleum floor. But Maggie didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the wedding card, still lying face up like a mockery of every Christmas morning she'd spent with Mason, every skinned knee she'd kissed. How do you grieve people who are still alive? That night, she didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she pulled down an old photo album from the bookshelf, the red one with the gold trim, the one she hadn't opened in years. She brushed the dust off the cover and set it gently on her lap. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages, each one releasing a different scent, a different year. There was David, 6 years old, holding a pine cone ornament they made together the year his father died. Maggie remembered how hard it was that Christmas, how she'd hidden in the bathroom to cry after David went to bed, knowing she had to wrap presents and fill stockings like magic still existed. There was Mason, just a baby swaddled in that blue blanket with the stitched bears. His tiny hand was curled around Maggie's finger. "You've got Grandma wrapped around your little finger," she'd whispered the day that photo was taken, and it had been true. She turned to a page filled with sticky flower handprints and snapshots of a much younger Maggie and little Mason standing by the kitchen counter covered in dough. That was the year they started their holiday baking tradition. Sugar cookies, chocolate fudge. One year, they even tried fruitcake, a disaster, but a memory nonetheless. Mason had insisted on mailing slices to every relative they knew. "We made this, Grandma. They need to taste our masterpiece." Then came the school photos. Mason in 3rd grade, missing 2 front teeth. Then in 7th grade, taller, with a self-conscious smile. A snapshot of him holding up his driver's permit, grinning like he'd won the lottery. And the picture from his high school graduation, Maggie in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else. She had been there for it all. And now, just like that, she was no one. What hurt wasn't just the exclusion. It was the quietness of it. The way they didn't even offer a fight, an argument, or a reason. As if her absence was not only acceptable, but preferable. She remembered the early signs, things that didn't register until now. A birthday dinner, where Emily forgot to tell her the location had changed. A Thanksgiving, where the turkey was served 2 hours early, and no one called to let her know. A family vacation to Cape May that she only heard about through a neighbor's Facebook post. David always had excuses. "We figured you wouldn't want to travel." "Oh, I thought you knew Emily. Thought you might be tired." Little by little, piece by piece, they'd edited her out, and she had let them. What kind of mother lets that happen? The guilt was almost worse than the betrayal. And then came the rage. Maggie wasn't the kind of woman who raised her voice. She believed in poise, in privacy. But as she sat there in the dim kitchen light, surrounded by memories, something inside her snapped. She wasn't angry at Mason. She still wasn't sure how much of this was his doing. But David, her son, the boy she raised on soup cans and lullabies, he had chosen silence over his own mother. That wasn't just disrespect. That was betrayal. She went to the hallway closet and pulled down a dusty box labeled Dad's Things. Inside was a bundle of old letters tax records and a small wooden frame, a photo of Charles holding baby David at the hospital. Maggie stared at it for a long time. Charles had died too young, but he had always believed in her, in their family, and in doing what was right no matter the cost. She thought about how hard she'd worked after he passed, taking double shifts, going to sleep with sore feet, and waking up to pack lunches with pennies in her purse. She'd skipped vacations, turned down dates, and worn the same winter coat for 15 years, just so David could go to college without debt. And now, he was letting his wife erase all of that. The tears came finally, not soft, graceful ones, but the kind that wreck you, that curl your back and leave your face raw. She cried for the birthdays missed, the thank yous, never said the moments stolen by someone who hadn't earned them. She cried until the sky turned pale and the house was cold. And then she got up. She went to her bedroom, opened her laptop, and clicked on Amanda's name in her email. The subject line was simple, time to talk, because Maggie Hart had been pushed out of the story. But she wasn't finished. She was just turning the page. Amanda didn't speak right away when Maggie's call came through. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Chicago, the kind of gray-skied day that usually blended into the background. But when she heard Maggie's voice calm, clear, and unshakably determined, Amanda sat up straight in her leather office chair. "It's time," Maggie said. "They've made their choice. Now, I'll make mine." They'd prepared for this moment, not because they expected betrayal, but because Amanda had seen too many of her wealthy clients caught off guard by family politics. She'd once told Maggie, half-joking, "Money doesn't change people. It reveals them." And Maggie, wise as ever, had replied, "Then let's make sure it reveals the truth." That truth came in the form of a living trust fund, $1.2 million worth of property investments and retirement savings that Maggie had spent a lifetime building. Quietly, carefully, with dignity. The trust had a single clause. Beneficiaries could be reassigned at any time, and Maggie alone held that power. When they drafted it, it was about security. Now it was leverage. Maggie didn't act out of vengeance. She acted out of necessity. Her family had chosen to silence her, to erase her. And now they would feel what it meant to be invisible, not through confrontation, but through control. Strategic, legal, and absolutely devastating. The first move came quietly. Amanda filed the paperwork to shift $200,000 from the main trust into a separate account one with a single new beneficiary, Amanda herself. Not permanently, just a trial run. But it sent a message. Within days, Maggie's phone rang again. This time it was David, but his tone had changed. There was no arrogance, no dismissiveness, just restrained panic. "Mom, did you move the money?" Maggie didn't answer immediately. She let the silence hang long enough for David to start filling it with excuses. I noticed something flagged in the family estate file. Emily checks it monthly just for planning purposes. You know how she is." Oh, she did. Maggie could practically hear Emily pacing behind David, whispering instructions, trying to manage the damage. "I moved a portion." "Yes," Maggie said evenly. "I thought it was time I updated things, made them reflect reality." There was a beat of silence. Then David tried again. "You know, Mom, I think we've all been under stress lately. The wedding planning. Maybe some wires got crossed." Maggie nearly laughed. "Wires don't cross. David, people choose. And your choice was very clear. From that moment, the cracks started spreading. Emily, who had always operated with calm control, began losing her grip. She sent Maggie a long email the next day, filled with faux concern vaguely veiled as mental health check-ins. "I just think you've been under a lot of emotional pressure, Margaret. This wedding's clearly been a trigger point. We all want what's best for you. And maybe it's time to talk to someone." It was subtle, but Maggie recognized it immediately. The same manipulative tone Emily used when isolating her from family events, casting doubt about her memory in front of Mason, planting tiny seeds of doubt that Maggie was slipping. This time, however, Maggie had receipts. She forwarded the email to Amanda, who responded with one sentence: "It's time we shine some light." Over the following week, Maggie and Amanda assembled a portfolio. Not just financial records evidence, screenshots of edited family photos where Maggie had been cropped out, a calendar invite where Emily had intentionally forgotten to include her, a recording Amanda had taken last Thanksgiving where Emily quietly suggested to Mason that Grandma's memory isn't what it used to be. Maybe she should sit this one out. It was subtle, calculated, and now exposed. The final nail came when Amanda located a security cam snapshot from a local grocery store dated just 3 months earlier. Maggie, clearly coherent, calmly conversing with a clerk about a coupon expiration. The image said everything. There was no mental decline, no confusion, just a woman being written out of her own legacy. When David called again, this time in person, Maggie was ready. He arrived alone, a little disheveled, a lot uncomfortable. Maggie greeted him at the door with an unexpected calmness, not the storm of a mother scorned, but the stillness of someone who'd already won. She invited him in, sat across from him, and slid a folder across the kitchen table. "What's this?" David asked already. "Wary. Evidence," Maggie replied. "In case you ever need to remember how this happened." Inside were transcripts, photos, emails, and a signed declaration from Amanda, all pointing to the orchestrated isolation, the subtle manipulation, and the false narrative Emily had constructed to remove Maggie from the family dynamic. David's face paled. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents. "You recorded us." "No." Maggie said, her voice steady. "I remembered you. That's all. And I protected myself." Then she said something that stopped him cold. "Mason's inheritance depends on one thing now. He comes here alone and looks me in the eye." David blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she replied, "the money means nothing to me anymore. But respect. That's non-negotiable. He wants to be part of this family. Then he'll show up like he means it." David left that night without argument. For the first time in years, Maggie saw a glimpse of the boy she raised, confused, cornered, no longer in control. The next 3 days were silent. Then late one afternoon there was a knock. It was Mason, not in a suit, not with his fiancée, just jeans, a hoodie, and a small worn envelope in his hand. Maggie opened the door slowly. Their eyes met, and for a second it felt like the years hadn't passed. "Hi, Grandma," he said, voice soft. "Can I come inside?" He handed her the envelope. Inside was a single photo, the two of them in her kitchen covered in flour, laughing so hard it blurred the camera. "I found this in a drawer," he said. "I didn't know what was going on. I swear. Emily, she made it seem like you were the one who pulled away." Maggie didn't cry. She just placed a hand on his cheek, and for the first time in months breathed easy. "I never left you," she whispered. "But I won't chase you either." That night they talked for hours. No accusations, no yelling, just truth. And the beginning of something far more powerful than revenge, redemption. 3 days after Mason's quiet return, the calm before the storm finally broke. It was a Thursday afternoon when Maggie saw David's car pulling into the driveway, not the usual slow, casual pace, but fast like a man in a rush to save face, before it's too late. She knew he'd come eventually. The panic in his voice during their last call made it clear he wasn't just worried about the money anymore. He was worried about control slipping through his fingers, about Emily's version of reality, unraveling faster than they could sew it back together. Maggie didn't wait by the door. She let him knock twice. When she opened it, David stood there with a kind of forced confidence, like a lawyer trying to win a case he knew he was already losing. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. "Then talk," Maggie replied calmly, motioning toward the living room. He paced. "Look, I don't know what Amanda's been filling your head with, But this trust nonsense, it's tearing everything apart. Mason is upset. Emily's devastated. We're a family, Mom. You're making it look like we're monsters. Maggie didn't flinch. You didn't need any help looking like that. You managed just fine on your own. David stopped pacing. This isn't you, he said, voice rising slightly. You're not vindictive. I'm not, she said, her tone still even. But I am done pretending this didn't happen. She stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, pulling out a slim folder. Not the legal documents from before, but something more personal. Inside were photographs, text messages, and a flash drive. I want to show you something, she said, sitting across from him. Because I think you've forgotten who you're dealing with. She opened the folder and laid out the first picture, a family photo from 3 Christmases ago. Maggie had been cropped out. The version posted online had only David, Emily, Mason, and Caroline. Emily posted this, she said, after that dinner where she told me the camera battery died. David looked at the photo, jaw tightening. The next item was a text thread between Mason and Emily. One message in particular stood out. Emily, let Grandma rest. She's been forgetting things lately. Probably doesn't even remember Mason's wedding is coming up. The date on the message was just 2 months prior. The lie had been so seamless, so quiet, that it had started to rewrite the family's entire view of Maggie until now. Maggie clicked play on the flash drive next. It was a short audio clip, Amanda's voice, asking a casual question at Thanksgiving. Amanda, did Margaret say if she was coming today? Emily's voice low but clear. I told her we moved the time. Honestly, she's better off not being here. She just repeats herself these days. David's face changed. The lawyer mask slipped. For the first time, he looked less like a man defending his family, and more like someone realizing he'd been asleep at the wheel for far too long. I didn't know about this, he muttered. She told me you were pulling away. She told you what you wanted to believe, Maggie said, because it was easier than confronting the fact that your wife systematically tried to erase me from my own family. Then calmly, she delivered the final blow. I've already reassigned 1/4 of the trust. Mason earned his second chance. If you and Emily want to be included in the rest, there are conditions. David stared at her. You're blackmailing me. No, she said. I'm setting boundaries. You're welcome to be part of my life, but on truth, on respect. And if you ever try to question my sanity again, I'll release every piece of this to the rest of the family. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, with a voice low and raw, he asked, What do you want from me? She leaned forward, not angry, not triumphant, just firm. I want my son back, not the one Emily rebuilt in her image, the one who used to believe in justice, in family. I want you to look your mother in the eye and tell me whether you stood by and let them destroy me because you didn't care or because you were too weak to stop her. David swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy who'd cried when he lost his dad, not the man who let his wife rewrite his mother's worth. I was scared, he admitted. She made it seem like you didn't need us anymore. I always needed you, Maggie said, but I was never going to beg to be loved. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. David sat back, defeated not by Maggie, but by his own reflection. You were right, he said finally. All of it. Maggie stood. Then prove it. Go home. Talk to your son, and the next time you let someone come between us, don't bother coming back. David left without another word. And for the first time since that dreadful phone call, Maggie felt the weight lift. Not because she'd won, but because she'd finally been heard. 3 days passed after David left Maggie's house, and the quiet in her home felt different now. It wasn't loneliness. It was the stillness that comes after a storm, when the windows stop rattling and you're left sweeping the broken pieces. Maggie didn't know what David would do with the truth, or if Emily would let him do anything at all. But she had said her part, and for once it felt like enough. She spent the weekend tending her garden, pruning the withered basil, and mulching the rose beds. The work was small, honest. It didn't ask for applause. And as her hands dug into the dirt, Maggie found herself thinking not of David, but of Mason. She wondered how much he knew, what he believed, whether he had scrolled past old photos and noticed her absence, or if the edges of his memory had already been trimmed by someone else's version of events. She didn't blame him, not fully, but she wasn't going to reach out again. Not anymore. Then, late Sunday afternoon as the sun began to dip and golden light poured through the kitchen window, there was a knock at the door. Maggie froze. No one ever came unannounced. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, walked slowly to the door, and pulled it open. It was Mason. He stood there in jeans, a hoodie and sneakers still dusted from travel. He looked tired. Not physically, but tired in that way. Only people who've woken up to their own guilt feel. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice uncertain. Maggie didn't speak. She just looked at him, waiting. I know I should have come sooner. I don't even know where to start." He pulled something from his pocket, a small, crumpled envelope. Inside was a photo, Maggie and Mason years ago. They were in her kitchen, both covered in flour, laughing so hard the image blurred. It was the day they'd tried to make homemade donuts and nearly burned down the stove. Maggie had framed that picture once. She hadn't seen it in years. "I found it in my old art box," he said. "It just hit me. I don't remember a lot from back then, but I remember this." Maggie held the photo gently. The edges were soft. Loved. He took a breath. "Grandma, I didn't know. I swear. Emily." She made it sound like you were pulling away, like you didn't want to be part of it anymore. "I didn't question it. I didn't think I had to." Maggie looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't a child anymore, but he wasn't beyond saving either. "You didn't ask questions," she said. "You let someone else write the story." That hurt. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry." They stood there for a long moment. Then Maggie stepped aside. "Come in," she said softly. "Let's talk." Inside, they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he once did spelling tests and built Lego castles. Maggie poured tea. Mason didn't touch his cup. His hands were folded restless, like he was afraid she might take the invitation back at any second. "I want to make it right," he said. "I don't care about the trust. I don't care about the money. I just want you to know I'm still your grandson. That part never changed." "But you let others speak for you," Maggie replied. "That's what broke us." Mason looked down. "I was stupid." "No," she said gently. "You were young, and you trusted the wrong voices." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I don't expect perfect," she said. "I just expect presence." He looked up at her eyes, glassy. "I missed you." "I missed me too." She smiled a little sadly, because when they erased me, I started to forget who I was too. He nodded quiet, then he pulled something from his backpack, a new photo this one framed. It was a picture of them from that same baking day, reprinted and placed under glass. "I want this on our wall," he said, "in our house." And just like that, the bridge was rebuilt. Not overnight, not completely, but with one truth, one visit, one tear it had begun. Maggie forgave him, not because he asked, but because he came. Because sometimes the apology isn't in the words, it's in the showing up. That night, they ate dinner together, leftover roast chicken, and the last of her garden peas. Mason talked about art, about how he never really connected with Caroline's family, how Emily always seemed to push certain ideas, who to invite, who to manage. I think I let her take the wheel, he admitted, and I didn't even notice we were going off-road. Maggie chuckled. You're back now. That's what matters. And just before he left, as the stars began to prick the sky, Mason said something that made Maggie's heart settle for the first time in years. Can we start baking again, Grandma? Just us. She smiled. Flowers in the cabinet. Aprons are clean. You bring the laughter. It happened in the most ordinary of places, the local supermarket. Maggie was comparing 2 brands of olive oil in aisle 7 when she heard the familiar clipped heels and perfumed breeze that always announced Emily before her voice did. Margaret Emily said, with that too sweet smile voice, loud enough for others nearby to hear. Maggie turned slowly, not surprised. Emily had always believed in controlling the setting. Public spaces meant Maggie couldn't cause a scene. But today, she didn't need to. Emily Maggie replied, her tone neutral. I've been meaning to talk, Emily said. It's really gotten out of hand, don't you think? The tension, the drama, especially with Mason. He's so confused. Maggie didn't flinch. He seemed pretty clear to me. Emily's smile thinned, but she kept performing the concerned daughter-in-law, trying to patch things up. I think you've misunderstood a lot of things, Emily said, voice quieter now. David and I have always had your best interest in mind. Always. Maggie placed the olive oil bottle gently into her basket. You've always had control in mind. There's a difference. That struck a nerve. Emily's eyes narrowed just slightly. We just want what's best for the family. Sometimes people age. They forget. They get confused. Maggie leaned in just enough to close the distance. Funny thing about confusion. It always leaves fingerprints. Emily froze. And that was when it happened, the unraveling. Because standing at the end of the aisle, half hidden behind the bread rack, was Mason, phone in hand, recording. He stepped forward. I've heard enough, he said. Emily turned color draining from her face. Mason, this is... He held up his phone. Save it. You just told Grandma in public that she's mentally declining. You've been gaslighting her for years. And now it's recorded. Emily reached for him, voice frantic. You don't understand what she's done. No, I finally do, Mason snapped. And now, so will Dad. Emily's composure shattered. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she didn't look like the poised counselor. She looked like someone who just realized the mirror cracked. Maggie stepped back, letting the moment settle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply said, You made me invisible. Now you're the one no one believes. Emily turned on her heel and left the store without another word. Mason and Maggie stood there a moment longer, just long enough for the truth to land. The performance was over, and the world finally saw who played what part. It was a cold Sunday morning when the family gathered at Maggie's house for the meeting, the kind of crisp air that carries the weight of unfinished business. The leaves had already begun to fall in golden swirls along her porch steps, and the sky was smeared with the pale light of early winter. But inside the house, Something far more transformative was about to unfold. Amanda arrived first, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit and holding a sleek black briefcase. She didn't say much. She never needed to. Her presence alone meant things were about to become very real. Mason followed not long after, carrying a tray of coffee and 2 spiral-bound notebooks tucked under his arm. His posture was different now, shoulders back, eyes steady. Gone was the hesitation that once shadowed his every step. And then came David. He entered slowly, eyes searching the room like a man walking into court. There was no Emily beside him. Whether by design or collapse, she had chosen not to come, to. Perhaps she already knew her role in this drama was over. Or perhaps she was still plotting. It didn't matter. Not anymore. The last to arrive was Doris Maggie's sister-in-law, a woman who'd once been like a sister, but had slowly vanished under Emily's influence. Doris walked with a cane, now her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Maggie opened the door and embraced her without a word. Whatever grudge had once lived between them had been smothered by years of silence, and Maggie had no room left for anything but truth. They gathered in the living room. No one took the couch. It felt too casual. Everyone stood or leaned, bodies taut with anticipation. Maggie took the center of the room, hands clasped calmly before her. Amanda placed the briefcase on the table and clicked it open with a metallic snap that sliced through the silence. "Let's begin," Maggie said. Amanda handed out copies of the trust documents, old and new. Highlighter marks, signature pages, withdrawal logs. Then came the folder labeled Evidence. Each person was given a packet of photographs, emails, transcripts, time-stamped text messages. Mason passed out his notes, a timeline he'd built, mapping out the progression of Emily's manipulation. David was the only one who didn't touch his folder. He stared at it like it might bite. Maggie spoke first. "You all know why we're here. For years I was pushed out of my own family, not through arguments or fights, but by omission, subtle erasure, the kind that doesn't scream but slowly dissolves who you are." She looked at David. "And you let it happen." David flinched. "Emily told me." Maggie raised her hand. "I don't care what she told you. I care what you chose to believe, and what you allowed. You sat silent while I was erased from birthdays, holidays, and even my grandson's wedding. And then, when I stood up for myself, you called it drama." Doris stepped forward, clearing her throat. "I remember the same pattern," she said. "Emily isolated me too. I stopped getting invites. I thought it was me. I thought I'd done something wrong." "You did nothing wrong," Maggie said gently. "But we let her divide us. That's over now." Amanda stepped forward, holding a smaller folder. "This is the reassignment of the trust," she said. "Effective immediately, David Hart and Emily Hart are removed as beneficiaries." David's head snapped up. "Wait." Maggie's voice was like iron. "You're not being punished. You're being removed. I will not reward betrayal, especially from my own child." "But it's not just your money," David said, desperation creeping into his tone. "Dad built some of that too." Maggie nodded. "And your father would have stood here beside me, because he believed in integrity, in truth. You lost sight of that the moment you started protecting lies instead of family." David looked at Mason, now a last lifeline. "You're really okay with this?" Mason didn't hesitate. "You let them turn Grandma into a ghost. And you didn't stop to ask why. You didn't even knock on her door until the money moved. That says everything." Amanda handed David a final paper. "You're entitled to contest this," she said. "Legally you can fight, but you'll lose. and the cost will be higher than anything in this trust. David looked at the document. His hands didn't shake. They just hung there limp, like he was holding the end of something far heavier than paper. He stood quietly and walked out without another word. The silence left behind wasn't heavy. It was clean. Maggie turned to Mason. "You're the only one who came back for the right reason," she said. Mason stepped forward. "I didn't come for a second chance at money. I came because I finally saw the truth. And I'm not leaving it again." Maggie handed him a small envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten. It was an addendum to the trust. Mason would receive a portion, not because he earned forgiveness, but because he had returned with humility, without expectation. "Don't let money change your truth," she said softly, "or you'll end up like him." Mason nodded. "I'd rather have dinner with you than $1,000,000. But thanks for both." They laughed. It was small, quiet, but real. The meeting ended not with applause or shouting or tears, just peace, and the unmistakable feeling that for the first time in years, Maggie Hart was no longer on the outside looking in. She was home, and so was her legacy. There's a moment after the noise ends, after the voices fade, when silence no longer feels like a punishment, but like a return. That was the kind of silence Maggie Hart woke up to now. Not the echoing emptiness she'd grown used to. Not the kind that gnawed at the walls and made her question every memory. This was a new quiet. Soft, whole, peaceful, in a way she hadn't felt since her husband was alive, since Mason was a little boy, sitting on her lap reading Dr. Seuss and getting cookie crumbs all over her blouse. It had been just over a month since the family meeting, since truths were laid bare and masks were dropped. David hadn't called again, and Maggie hadn't expected him to. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. Some deserve to stay in ruins as a reminder of what happens when you put pride before people. But others rise from the ashes. Mason had kept coming back, not with apologies, but with time, with presence. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he brought nothing but conversation. And always, he brought himself unguarded, honest changed. They started baking again. They laughed again. One night, after too much frosting and a burned tray of lemon bars, Mason had said, "This feels more like family than anything I've had in years." And Maggie knew what he meant. Because for years, she had sat through dinners filled with polite tension and smiles that didn't reach the eyes. She'd been offered a seat at the table, yes, but only if she knew her place. Only if she didn't speak too long, remember too well, or love too loudly. But now she didn't need permission to belong. Her home felt full again. Not crowded, not noisy, just alive. Amanda still visited often now, more like a daughter than ever. They would sit with coffee and no agenda, no drama, just stories, future plans, what to plant next spring, whether Mason should apply to that teaching fellowship in Vermont, whether Maggie would ever finish the novel she started writing in the 90s. Maggie didn't need validation anymore, because something had shifted. Her value was no longer tied to whether she was invited to weddings or tagged in Facebook photos. Her legacy was not measured in how others spoke about her, but in how she continued to show up day after day as her full self. She had reclaimed her name, her place, her voice. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone, but most of all herself, that she had never been just a grandmother, or just a widow, or just someone aging in the background of other people's lives. She was the foundation. She was the reason those lives even had something to stand on. And no one, No daughter-in-law, no misguided son. No history rewritten in whispers could take that away. If you're still here, still listening, it's probably because something about Maggie's story felt familiar. Maybe not the details, maybe not the trust fund or the dramatic family meeting, but the emotion, the quiet betrayal, the feeling of being erased by the very people you once fed, loved, protected. And if that's you, I want you to know something. You matter. You're not too old. You're not too emotional. You're not imagining it. And your story deserves to be told. So I want to ask you, have you ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family? Have you ever had to fight? Not with fists, but with patience and truth, just to be seen. Have you ever reclaimed your place? Or are you still waiting for the right moment to let's make this more than just a video? Share your story in the comments. Don't hold back. This is your space. If Maggie's journey moved, you hit that like button. Know someone who needs to hear this. Send it to them. Don't assume they're okay. And if you want more stories like this raw, honest, unforgettable, subscribe. Join this growing circle of voices that refuse to be silenced. You've heard Maggie's voice. Now, let's hear yours.